Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this December 5th, 2016 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can catch my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's Pacific time. They also play the show at 11 a.m., so don't miss it. But if you do, go to my long-standing website at arcticbeacon.com, and you can get shows going back over a decade regarding what I call the Vatican-led New World Order, all its tentacles. And let me tell you something, they call us here the alternative to the alternative news, for good reason. And let me tell you, you're not going to get the full story on the mainstream, you know that. You'll get the left-right paradigm, then you go to the alternative media, and you get, I'm telling you, you start going on the internet today and try to get some truth, and you're going to be led around the nose like, boy, I'll tell you, I feel like a racehorse going around the track 100 million times, and I've only been up an hour today. But anyway, you ever wake up some mornings? First of all, I've got some really important things to talk about today, but I want to say this first. You ever wake up in the morning and you really don't have an idea of what's going on, and you just kind of sit there for a while you're putting your socks on, getting ready, and you go, what's it all about? And you know, when that happens, like it happened to me this morning, I look for, people that have said certain things that make me feel like, well, I'm not the only one. And then I look for a song or something that picks me up, because that's a lonely feeling. So I found this quote by Woody Allen from Radio Days that made me feel like, well, I'm not the only one that feels this way. And he said this, quote, "The years pass so quickly. Where do they go? So quickly. And then we get old. We never knew what any of it was all about, did we?" Wow. And I'll tell you, that made me feel a little better, because I said, well, maybe there's a lot of people that feel this way. And then I started thinking about how I felt when I was younger. When I was in my 20s and 30s, I thought I was indestructible. I thought life would go on forever. And now that you get into the kind of the twilight of your life at the age I'm in, you start counting the days sometime. You wake up some days and go, okay, how long have I got? On the low side, I could get hit by a bus today. On the high side, well, maybe, 80? 82? So subtract that from the age you are, and you go, oh, wow, I better get on the ball here if I want to figure this out. But at that point, when I start really getting confused like that, and I'm sure we all do, I look for something to pick me up. And this morning, I found a song that may help all of us feel a little better. It's only 3 minutes, and then we'll get into the important things. And if you pick out the singer and tell me, you can email me at gregbeacon@gmail.com. I will give you a pair of 400 Apache sunglasses. No, I won't. I can't. They're $80. But I'm telling you, if you want a good pair of sunglasses, man, look up the 400 Apache. Because I'm always looking, I'm out on the ocean a lot. And, boy, you really need good sunglasses. So, anyway, see if you can figure out who sings this, and maybe it'll make you feel a little better. That made me feel a little better. Getting out of the dark side of the road into the bright side. And, just here to share my heavy load. And that's why I do this radio station show, I think, is to share my heavy load sometimes with these stories about the Vatican, and then getting your responses and all of your emails, and figuring there's other people that really understand this too, and some probably better than me. And so it's really a great experience to enter into this kind of discussion. And so stick with me, because I've got a whole bunch of good things today on this show, and we're going to talk about a number of things regarding the Jesuit order, where we stand, the law, how the law in our country, and we're looking at this changeover in America of the elections and what the law really does and what this changeover means. First of all, there was a good point that someone brought to my attention that all 44 presidents come from, I've known this before, from royal bloodlines. So this idea that anybody can grow up to be president is true as long as you're from royal bloodlines. But I didn't realize that 34 of the 44, and now probably 45, so 35 of the 45, come from are related to Charlemagne. That's quite interesting. So if you're related to Charlemagne, email me, and we'll run you for president. And then you got a good chance to win. We'll touch base with the Jesuits to see if it's okay. They always put their rubber stamp on who they run for president. And another thing, somebody sent me, this was quite interesting, that The Simpsons, if you go back to The Simpsons show in the year 2000, they've got a show where Donald Trump is coming down that escalator in Trump Towers with the same red tie, the same blue suit, and the same turn and wave of the hand that was on The Simpsons. Incredible. So you don't think this stuff is planned out? So what do they have planned out for us in the future? So stick with me and we'll get to that. But one thing I did want to touch base with right now before I do a very important story. Last week I had John Levy on the show and we talked about Christian persecution. I mean, full-blooded killing, beheadings going on in Nigeria, in Africa. We've got 70 million Christians surrounded by Muslims in Nigeria waiting for the slaughter, and you hear nothing about it in America. Well, that's because we have the same persecution going on here, but in a more subtle way. And it's always, it seems, if you really look at it, it's the Christians here, the supposed Christians, that's what our government tells us they are, protecting everybody. But if you look at Obama's policies and the policies that have been going on for years, it's all geared to destroy America. George Soros and all his money is a good example, how he works together with them. So it doesn't make any sense. It's all backwards, right? So it's the Christians. They want to present this idea that Christians are protecting everyone. No, they're not. They're not Christians. They are Satan's people, posing as Christians. And, let me do this right now, and then I'm going to get into, I want to talk about this Tony Alamo petition again to get this straightened out so people understand where we're going with this and what we can really do. Let me do this first, though. This I want to talk to you about. Okay, so first off, we're talking about, this transfer of power now in the United States, our rulers telling us what to do, ruling over us, and seemingly causing more problems than they're worth. But who really are they? Well, we did say that they, if you want to get down to the truth, they represent Satan calling themselves Christian, but they'll never tell you that. Now, this is all ordained by God, so the point I'm trying to make is he's allowing this to occur. Now, if we're talking about, let's just specifically talk about secular rulers before we get into something a little bit more important. And in the book Rulers of Evil, I think Tupper Saucy said it really well when he said, the ruling institutions are what they say they are. Under the Cain Covenant, they must truthfully identify their origins, which they do with Kabbalah. Now, they do identify themselves, and that's what we do on our show a lot, depicting the images that you see in on your dollar bill, all of the signs and symbols that they give us, even those Simpson shows, are really what has been ordained by God. They must tell you what they're doing, but it's only the people that understand it are those who see. And, that's why I said if you go to Washington, you can see it's Babylon all over again, and all these fascist signs and symbols, and we've talked about them, even on the top of the Capitol building. So they're actually telling you who they are, as God instructs in the Bible, but many people don't see it. Now, Tupper says this, he says, it's only fair then that he writes this chapter in the presumption that the Bible really is what it says it is. It claims to be the unique revealed Word of God and the veritable literary embodiment of Jesus Christ. Talk, Greg. Will you please learn how to speak? But anyway, if we disbelieve that claim, we must disbelieve all the mottos, insignia, bulls, encyclicals, laws, acts, ordinations, constitutions, oaths, and decrees of the rulers of evil. So what he's saying is that, and I happen to agree with this, if you know, how many people on the internet believe, they'll say to me, yeah, did you see those evil insignias? This is the Tower of Babel, or these guys are satanic. Look at what's on the dollar bill and all this stuff. But how many of these people believe, if they believe that, you then must believe that the Bible is the exact Word of God? But how many people are hypocritical and don't really believe that? That's a good question. But then, if you just go to the Bible, and I find myself doing it more and more lately, Paul said this about what we're talking about. And what he said was, the purpose of the law is to regulate people who are evil. And he says this, we also know that the law is made not for the righteous, but for the lawbreakers and rebels, the ungodly and sinful, the unholy and irreligious, for those who kill their fathers and mothers, for murderers, for adulterers and perverts, for slave traders and liars and perjurers, and for whatever else is contrary to the sound doctrine that conforms to the glorious gospel of our blessed God. So, in other words, any behavior not conforming to the glorious gospel of God belongs to the law, which obviously from its subject matter is a jurisdiction foreign to Christ. Okay, so that pretty well explains where we're at when we talk about our governments, right? So, what happens is, though, people become too presumptuous. They want to take things into their own hands. They don't realize that God has ordained all of this stuff. So how do you live with it? This will lead us into the persecution of the Alamo ministry, which basically their purpose was to tell you the truth about the Gospels and to let people know, open their eyes so they could see all of these signs and insignias and understand all of this stuff. That was their role, and that's why Pastor Alamo was put in prison. Okay, real quickly, let me pull this. It's a little clip. I'm going to play a little bit of of Walter Veith doing a video on exposing the Jesuit order, and he talks about how people are very presumptuous and don't really put their faith in God. And here's what he said. See if it rings a bell.
Word yet once more signifies the removing of those things that are shaken, as of things that are made, that those things which cannot be shaken may remain. I believe with all my heart that Christianity is in the shaking period. Wherefore we receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved, let us have grace, whereby we may serve God acceptably, with reverence and godly fear, for our God is a consuming fire. Choice. Here's a choice to be made. Bear in mind that it is none but God that can hold an argument with Satan. There's too much presumption in the world. Too many people marching around commanding Satan to do this, commanding Satan to do that. Not even Gabriel could stand against him without calling the one who is what God is, Michael, to come to his aid. How much less we? What presumption we have in the world today. It's unbelievable. Martin Luther versus Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuit order. They were contemporaries. They lived at the same time. And yet they were so totally different. Luther's appeal was to submit the conscience directly to God through the Word. And Loyola's drive was to submit the conscience to the papacy. Here was the distinction. Ignatian spirituality was to be achieved through spiritual exercises by substituting imagination and encounter theology for the reality of faith. He found another way of guaranteeing a spiritual experience, which was no longer based on faith, but on the actual substance. Here is a quote from D'Aubergine, The History of the Reformation of the 16th Century, probably one of the best exposés on the Reformation ever written. It's huge. Inigo, it's another name for, or short version of Ignatius Loyola, and the author writes, Inigo, instead of feeling that his remorse was sent to drive him to the foot of the cross, persuaded himself that these inward reproaches proceeded not from God, but from the devil, and resolved never more to think of his sins, to erase them from his memory and bury them in eternal oblivion. Both Martin Luther and Inigo had the sense of guilt. Both of them chastised themselves to get rid of it. Martin Luther made the great discovery, the just shall live by faith, and Inigo did not. Luther turned towards Christ, Loyola fell upon himself. Visions came ere long to confirm Inigo in the convictions at which he had arrived. Inigo did not seek truth in the Holy Scriptures, but imagined in their place immediate communication with the spirits.
Okay, so here you have it today. We have Luther. He takes his, he looks at things and seeks the truth in the Scriptures. But what does Loyola do? He looks to himself, to dreams and visions and apparitions and doctrine of what is now the Vatican. It's the same thing going on today. So if you want to separate true Christianity, you can do it that way. Now, ask your Christian leaders, and I put that in quotes, why they support the Pope and allowed him to come to America and talk and speak as if he was the head of the world. If they represent him, if the Pope represents our leaders, they all represent Satan, don't they? So we're no longer making this division between true Christianity and the Vatican and the world leaders. Now, when we take it one step further and you ask yourself, what do you look for in America? Do you see Christian persecution here as well? Of course. And I've seen it all week. I was talking to people all week who seem to understand that Christians are being, the word of God is being taken out of everything, out of the schools, out of everything. They're doing it in this kind of Jesuit way to destroy it from within. And so you have people like Tony Alamo, who's Christian, and all of his people that were with the ministry that I still talk to today, made this separation, just as Martin Luther did, and were pledging their oath to the Scriptures, not to dreams and visions and the occult, as our leaders are. And you can find it in all of the insignias that represent everything this country is about. It is not what they tell you it is. That's the hidden agenda that we get at on this show. And so in the second half today, we'll talk a little bit more about this. And I do want to get into an article that Tony Alamo wrote from prison recently, connecting himself and talking about how, Bill Clinton, his relationship with Bill Clinton, and how Bill Clinton turned on him, and as well as Waco. It's an incredible piece that shows you a bit of history that how the real rulers of evil, Bill Clinton, operate and what they were trying to do to this ministry for over 40 years. So you don't think Christians are being persecuted? And I'm also going to lay out a strategy. We're trying to get this petition into the pardon attorney's hands for Trump in the future. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And basically, you'll understand the strategy, and hopefully we can get Tony out of jail. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit DiscountGoldandSilverTrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit DiscountGoldandSilverTrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal on this December 5th, 2016 day on our calendar. And we're going over a number of things. I was talking about the petition online that I have started for Tony Alamo and his ministry. And I've got a whole bunch of signatures and a lot of good comments. And we're going to be presenting this to the pardon attorney of Donald Trump to see if we can get Tony out of prison. And I'll get to that in a moment. But on the major subject that we were talking about in the first half hour, regarding the Jesuit control of our foreign and domestic policy and how this reverts to our government and how our government leaders pose as Christians, then bring over the Pope and let him, he gave a speech standing on the, in the back of the White House as if he was in, on this big, presidents don't even talk from there. And it was as if he was in St. Peter's Square talking over his flock. So that was a good image of who's really in control. And if we relate the Vatican to satanic powers, then we know what our government is about. Makes common sense, doesn't it? But how much common sense do we have in this country? Very little. Because people don't understand what we're talking about here. And why? Because they have been controlled, have become puppets. And our media is very vital for this. And that's why, I call it a travesty. Not so much that they concentrate on the left or the right and how they denigrated Donald Trump. It's this story that's not brought out, which would open up the eyes of many to see those cult images that we talk about, that God says that these rulers of evil must, through Cain's, through the story of Cain, who must divulge before they are protected by him. Yes. So, what Walter Veith was saying is that, we understand that too many of us take it into our own hands, thinking we can change this system. When I was talking to many of the people in the Alamo ministry, they never wanted to change the system. They never were out there with guns and trying to revolt and say we need another government. They were just making people aware of the system. And that's very threatening to the Jesuit order. Very, very threatening. And that's why Tony Alamo sits in jail. But people ask me, Greg, when did you first realize the Jesuits were in control of your foreign and domestic policy of the United States and all over the world? This hidden hand. And I said, I think it went back to when I was in Rome working on a number of stories back in the 1980s. And I was sitting at a coffee shop with a high-level priest. Right across from the Vatican, there's a street there. And we were sitting having coffee. And I was bringing up some things that I bring up on this show. For example, like, is it really true that the Jesuits, the Jesuit general, controls the Pope of Rome? And is it really true that the Jesuits have been trying to, through very deceptive ways, try to control the government of the United States? And this priest was smiling while I was saying this. And I said to him, I bet you a lot of that information is in the Vatican vault, the archives there. I'd love to get in there, Father. And he looked at me and said, son, the people can't handle the truth. The world would be in chaos if they knew the truth. And I said, what do you mean the truth? He says, just remember what I told you. And he didn't want to say, oh, I was right. But he was then I walked away, and it wasn't for an article I was doing. It was off the record. And I walked away because his eyes told me more than anything. And I started to think, boy, I'm on the right track. And as my life progressed, and every time when I started to bring this story up in the United States on different radio stations, and every time I would be criticized, even fired from stations, and people then, I'd see stories on the internet that were not true about me, I realized exactly I was on the right track. So the point becomes, where is the threat here? And this is really interesting because people ask me, they said, well, if you know that Trump and these people, and all of them, Obama and the Jesuits, have picked only the American presidents, and they all work together with this hidden agenda, why do you think they will release Tony Alamo? And I said, well, here's the reason I think it'll work. And here's the reason why I think they will release him. Because I am going to show in this writ, and the writ that I have to send to this pardon attorney can't be just something that is very simple. I'd like to get Tony Alamo out of jail and present what I have on the petition. It has to be well documented. So there has to be a lot of the facts that are coming out that show this was a travesty of justice. And we can do that because we've been following this case both from the legal arena and also from the public opinion arena, and also from a number of federal employees that were hired to frame him. So we have some really good facts. But that's not quite enough, because we're dealing with the hidden agenda that the Alamo ministry wanted to tell people through talking about what the Bible says. And that's the reason right now that people are getting their heads cut off in other parts of the world. While all these Christians are being persecuted in other parts of the world, literally, and even on this petition, I've gotten messages from people all over the world, not from our country, that say, yes, this persecution is real. They won't even let us talk about this stuff. And people are dying, being killed. So here we go. What's then the possibility? The possibility is to show that the Alamo ministry and anyone who understands this is not a threat, because we're not wanting to change the world here. We're not wanting to overthrow their power. What we want is just people to understand it. And the point I'm trying to make is, even the Bible says only a few will. So what are they worried about? And I am going to point that out to them. I'm going to say, even in the Bible, there are people that disagree. The Bible will point out that God is allowing this. If you do work for Satan, okay, you're telling us. I know you're already telling us. It's through your signs and symbols. You don't have to come out and say it. And so what I'm saying is, he's not a threat. I'm not a threat. Who is a threat are the people that you're trying to rule, the evil people that you're put here to. Those are the threats to you. And that's what you should keep under control. And so if I can make this point, I think we have a good chance, because it puts it into perspective through the Bible. And the work of Christians should be allowed to go on. And all I'm saying is, we know what the Bible says about that anyway, don't we? We can't be too presumptuous, but we can tell the truth. And the truth will set you free. And so I think the truth will set Tony Alamo free. And I'm going to present it this way. And even send this show I'll attach this show. And all I'm saying is, if we look at it from that point of view, can't we live with it better? Putting it in God's hands, and you feeling lucky enough to have understood it, to had your eyes open to it. And there's nothing wrong with trying to open up everybody's eyes. In fact, it's almost a Christian duty to do that. And everyone can do it in their own way. I've always said, maybe, people throughout the years, there are times when people would say, well, you're up against a brick wall here, Greg. What are you trying to do? And I'd say, well, if one person's eyes are open, it's better than none. And still to this day, I get many emails of people that say, God, I remember reading you 10 years ago, and thanks a lot, because it opened my eyes, and I did all my own research. And I found out that really what you're talking about, adds up to what the Bible is saying. And, I used to say it before I even know what the Bible said. And I still don't know what a lot of it says. And again, that's why I come to this show, in a sense, to as that song in the beginning of the show by Van Morrison said, to ease my heavy load, because it is a heavy subject, and what takes that heavy load off is two things: sharing it with fellow people that understand it, and realizing that God is in control of this. And He's the only one that can really fight Satan and all of these people, and He will. And I think with that kind of attitude, we have a good chance of getting Tony out of prison. We'll just have to wait and see. And also remember this: the reason that a good document has to be given to the pardon attorney is because his job is to keep things away from the president. To only get him involved with things, and he's going to be busy in the first couple months anyway, so it's probably will linger on a little bit. But the point I'm trying to make is, if we can point out also that Tony was also had relationships with the evil Clintons, which Trump has called many times the same thing, and showing how Clinton was, determined to bring down Christians, and Trump is saying he wants to help Christians, so why not? And also, I think I've heard that Tony used to sell some of the, he used to make designer jackets for the ministry to raise money to help the poor. I think he was selling. Someone told me he was selling jackets to Trump. So I think Donald Trump knows who Tony is. But you know what I wanted to do for the next 10 minutes? There's an article that Tony just wrote from prison called "Bill Clinton, the Pope, and I." And I thought I'd read parts of it to you, and I'll tell you where to go to get the whole thing. I've only got about 10 minutes, so I'll read some of it, and then I'll tell you where to go to read the whole article. And this was just written by Tony from prison. And by the way, he's 82 years old and blind. He probably has to have this transcribed. And here's what he said. He said, "My first experience with Bill Clinton, the governor of Arkansas, was when I, Tony Alamo, was driving back from the Miami, Florida. This was after Susie, my wife, had passed away. I went to Florida to do a Christian work among the Mariottes who had come from Cuba. I wasn't aware I guess they're a Christian group from Cuba. I heard that they were killing people in Miami, so I decided to go to Florida both to try to get Susie off my mind and to witness to these people so they could stop killing people. Or maybe they weren't Christians. Maybe they were the ones killing people. But anyway, there was some Cuban strife going on, and Tony decided to go down there to see if he could help them. After I won several of these people to the Lord, so I guess they were the bad guys, I headed back to and I said the bad guys. I headed back to Arkansas, where I had my main headquarters. I received a call on my car phone from a real estate friend of mine who had sold us most of our property in the Arkansas area. He asked me if I would like my friend in Little Rock to get rid of Mrs. Rappaport, the lady from Arkansas Child Welfare Services who was causing us so much trouble by persecuting us. Now let me add this. In my quest to understand this whole story for the last 10 years, I've read about and seen and talked to this persecution of this Christian ministry has been going on for over 40 years. Now back to Mrs. Rappaport from the Child Welfare Services. Tony says she was marching on our property on Georgia Ridge with soldiers and with members of every government agency you can think of, causing us a lot of problems. This group would frighten our children out of their wits because they had guns and were uninformed. Mrs. Rappaport was doing this to look like a hero, since the media was doing a smear campaign against Christian groups back then, calling them cults. Mrs. Rappaport led multiple raids on our church, and the media printed all kinds of bad stories about us because of these raids and because of the false words she said about us. Okay, let me stop there for a minute and add something. In a show I did just recently, I pointed out how our government's allowing all these radical Muslim groups to exist in our country now, and pointed out one of them in Hancock, New York, about 145 miles north of New York City. There's a town, and they got a sign there. It's called Islamburg. And the FBI has been monitoring them, but allowing them to exist. And they have pictures of them marching, talking about creating war in America, against Christians, and they're marching with weapons. You can see the rifles. Now, why don't they raid these people and put them in jail? But that's not the only one. There's 30 or 40 of these compounds all over the place. So you don't think Christians are being persecuted, and you don't think they've been persecuted for the last 40 years? These are the people that should be in jail, not Tony Alamo. And maybe we should point this out too. And also, I want to add to the people listening to the show, go to your local people, local governors, especially in Arkansas, where this case took place. Let's make sure they get this information so that we can get this past the pardon attorney into the hands of the person that can pardon him. All right, back to Tony. He said that, Mrs. Rappaport led multiple raids on our church, and the media printed all kinds of bad stories about us because of these raids and because of the false words she had said about us. I told my real estate friend, no, I'd rather know for sure that it is God delivering us than the governor or anyone else. So you see, Tony understood that it was only God. He wasn't presuming anything, trying to change anything. He said, God will be delivering us from this, not the governor. Are you sure? Said his friend. My friend said. I said, yes, Bobby. Thank you, though, and thank the governor for me also. He said, all right. The next day, when I arrived in Arkansas, I read in the Fort Smith, Arkansas newspaper, the Southwest Times Record, that Mrs. Rappaport had been fired and was banned from working in any government job for the rest of her life. I couldn't understand why Bill Clinton was being so nice to our church and me, because I really didn't know him. After a week or so, Bill Clinton told me he would give me the right to open a big theme park on our property on the top of a mountain range above Alma and Dyer, Arkansas, where everyone below could see it. However, I had heard about an evangelist who did just that, and that evangelist was arrested and put in prison for it, so I decided we were not going to do that. That was a smart move, Tony. What about that other guy recently who had that dinosaur park? I can't think of his name right now. Nicholas, remind me of it. Our radio station guy, our radio station owner plays the show. I can't think of his. Kent Hovine, right? Yeah, okay. So anyway, Tony, back to Tony. Another time, the mayor of Dyer, Arkansas, asked me, why don't you send a letter to Clinton and ask him for a fire station for Dyer? So now the guy's getting back to Tony, asking for a fire, saying, why don't you ask Clinton for a fire station? He's treating you real good lately. I told him that I just heard Clinton on the radio saying there was no money available for new projects. He told me, write the letter anyway. I'm sure he'll do it. I wrote the letter and told Bill Clinton we had a lot of property there in Dyer and no fire station to protect it. Clinton immediately approved a new fire truck and fire station for Dyer. Soon after that, I received a message from the Lord that I had to move our church into several different areas because of some great danger. I realized I had to move quickly, so I did. I kept the Arkansas and the Los Angeles properties. Then we moved some of our people to New York, New Jersey, Cleveland, Chicago, Nashville, and several other cities. After doing this, I found out for some reason Clinton had gone sour on us, and I had no idea why. One of the people in my church stated that Bill Clinton had written a bad story about me in his book, titled My Life, on pages 169 and 170. I started wondering if Clinton did these favors for me to pretend that he was for us instead of against us. Somebody gave me a book where Clinton's own men said he was using them to hustle women for him. Clinton would say in a crowd of people, you see that woman in that third row? I think she likes me. Ask if she'd like to go to lunch with me. His men would do it. A lot of books like this were published, but I didn't know about them until I was made aware of them. Interesting. When Clinton became president, the government raided Waco and killed a lot of innocent, true Christian men and women and children there. I did not know them, but I found out that they were a group of really good people. I have heard other stories about them too, but I did not know them. I also heard that Hillary was the main force behind the Waco massacre, but I have no first-hand knowledge of that. Janet Reno was in it with Clinton. I watched Bill Clinton on television when he said, "Maybe this will teach people to never join a cult," he added. And there are many cults like that in my state of Arkansas, where he had been governor for, several years. He said they were going to get rid of them as well. He was referring to us. It was too late, however, because I had already moved our congregation to several other states. I knew Clinton was doing his best to make us look like a cult. I thought, wow, this guy is really a deceiver. A few years later, Clinton stated on television that the worst mistake he made while he was in office was to have all those people in in Waco killed, because they were really not guilty of any wrongdoing, just as we are not guilty of any wrongdoing. Before all this, he said that the Christians in Waco were a dangerous cult. I wondered what they did that was so dangerous, and why were members of the military in a tank shooting at our own people? They were not a cult at all. I couldn't figure out why Clinton reversed his thinking about me. Then I remembered I saw pictures of him really warming up to the Pope while he was in Rome. The Pope has never liked me, because I exposed his cult as being very satanic. They have murdered millions of people. The Pope hates me and the work of God our group has done. One thing we did was expose his dangerous cult for what it is. It is a dangerous because, again, they have literally murdered millions of good Christian people. He never is going to give up any more than I will give up. So here we go. Tony's telling you exactly why the Pope, probably through the Jesuits, told Clinton, we got to bring this ministry down in that final raid in 2008. Well, anyway, I only have a minute and a half. I'll finish the article maybe tomorrow or the next day. I'll try it tomorrow. But tomorrow I was planning to have on Leo Zagami from Rome and talk about that referendum in Italy where the prime minister now is going to resign, and it's a populist movement like here, so there's a lot to talk about. But anyway, go to alamoministries.com/newsletters, Bill Clinton. You'll find it. And the article's Bill Clinton, the Pope, and I, just written by Tony Alamo from prison. And I think you'll find it interesting as it traces the history of why this, what Clinton's involvement was in the actual framing of Tony Alamo. And then, that's verified by FBI agents who have come forward and said they were told to frame Tony Alamo. What more do you need to know? And the man sits in jail for 175 years. So, hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back tomorrow, Tuesday, on the Investigative Journal. Have a good evening. And remember, come back tomorrow. And come back to the show that's been called The Alternative to the Alternative Media. See you tomorrow. Have a good evening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.